Good morning, Dan and Amy. I want to pick up on this discussion of the two Trumps and the two-faced Hillary. The two Trumps, the Trump that gave the speech at the Union League Club in Philadelphia in the morning about military readiness and rebuilding our military, who offered thoughtful remarks on complicated issues like the Middle East, such as this.
In a Trump administration, our actions in the Middle East will be tempered by realism. The current strategy of toppling regimes with no plan for what to do the day after only produces power vacuums that are filled simply by terrorists. Gradual reform, not sudden and radical change, should be our guiding objective in that region. We should work with any country that shares our goal of destroying ISIS and defeating radical Islamic terrorism.
Okay, that's pretty kind of right down the middle type of remark, kind of philosophical construct for the Middle East. But then there's the Trump in the forum hosted by, was it Tamron Hall? Or Matt Lauer?
Yeah, it was Matt Lauer.
I mean, I get those two confused. His bizarre affinity for
his love.
Russian dictator Vlad Putin.
Well, he does have an 82% approval rating, according to the different pollsters, who, by the way, some of them are based right here. Look.
He's also a guy who annexed Crimea, invaded Ukraine, supports Assad in Syria, supports Iran, is trying to undermine our influence in key regions of the world, and according to our intelligence community, probably is the main suspect for the hacking of the DNC computers.
Well, nobody knows that for a fact, but do you want me to start naming some of the things that President Obama does?
But do you want to be complimented by that former KGB officer?
Well, I think when he calls me brilliant, I'll take the compliment, okay?
It's not about,
it's so self-serving.
Well, it's not about Putin complimenting Trump. It's about Trump's unwillingness to say he is a dictator. His relationship with Assad is troubling. His relationship with Iran is troubling. His revanchism is troubling, and we're going to back our NATO allies in the Baltics and elsewhere. What his propaganda infused popularity in Russia has to do with anything, I have no idea. I mean, does he want to build a Trump Tower in Moscow? Maybe that's the basis.
That's good, and then not to mention the Russian fighter jet that came within feet of an American plane yesterday too.
So it's the kind of trying to accentuate the Trump we heard in the morning and deal with the Trump we heard at least in part in the evening. But then there's Hillary. There is Hillary.
She couldn't lie her way out of a paper bag yesterday.
Oh, she's trying.
Oh, she did. She looked like she was struggling. It was a roast without the comedy and the laughter.
And by the way, she was lying on multiple broadcast channels simultaneously because you had the candidate for him, then you had her and that suburban dad on the down low she's running with sit down in front of David Muir at ABC and talk about the classified emails and her trafficking and classified information. And she gave this whopper again.
I take classification very seriously. And what I want people to understand is really two things. I take responsibility. I have learned that trying to explain what happened made it sound to some people like I was trying to excuse it. There are no excuses. I take responsibility. I made a mistake. I've apologized. And obviously, I wish I could do differently what happened. I certainly would never do that again.
I'll never, ever do it again.
I promise I never.
I didn't do anything wrong, and I'll never do it again. Okay. All right. For more on this and what the two presidential candidates, one of whom is going to be the commander-in-chief of the United States military, what they had to say yesterday, we're joined by former Pentagon official and American Enterprise Institute resident scholar Michael Rubin. Michael, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be talking with you guys.
It would have been a pleasure for us to have you moderate that forum last night instead of Matt Lauer, but unfortunately NBC News hasn't tapped you yet. Hopefully that will change. But in your absence, what takeaways did you have from the two performances, respectively?
Well, at this point, you've got a situation where both candidates are either deeply flawed or have spoken out of both sides of their mouth. So on one hand, you had Donald Trump saying he's always opposed the Iraq war from the very beginning, and from audio recordings, we know that's not true. We have Hillary Clinton, who keeps stumbling over taking classification seriously, and then she says in her FBI interview that she thought the C markings, instead of meaning confidential, were just alphabetical paragraph markers, and someone should tell her that the letters of the alphabet don't start with C, they start with A and B as well, because that explanation made no sense. This is the type of thing that you really need to pin them down on. But ultimately, what I would have liked to seen fleshed out a little bit was Donald Trump's comments in Philadelphia, which had been perhaps based on former Senator Jim Talent's memo in the National Review saying, hey, look, we need to have a real plan to rebuild the United States military if we are going to be able to counter some of the threats which are out there. And as you said, it's worth asking not only Donald Trump, but both candidates about their relations to Russia and their assessments of Russia.
Are you surprised by this bromance that's going on? It just won't stop between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin?
I am a little bit. Look, the problem to me isn't simply Putin's revanchism, Putin's megalomania at home, Putin's corruption, and all of that. It's the fact that he has sought to gear his military to fight the United States. He has created a new generation of tactical nuclear weapons which are aimed at the United States or at U.S. forces. Ditto with regard to his new submarines. Someone needs to ask him, why are you doing that? The issue isn't simply the Ukraine or Georgia. At the same time, Hillary Clinton has never fully explained her judgment with regard to the so-called reset. And up until a few months ago, I bet you if she were asked directly, she would still be defending that idea of a reset. And one of her chief aides, Ellen Tauscher, when she was at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C., actually took money from a Kremlin institute in order to launch a project called Mutually Assured Stability instead of Mutually Assured Destruction, whatever it was, which was just kumbaya nonsense on the Pentagon, on the Kremlin dime.
And so to Trump's speech in the morning in Philadelphia, I mean, he outlined with some detail what he plans to do in furtherance of rebuilding the military. He talked about double-digit increases in manpower in some of the branches, $50,000 increase in active duty troops from 490 to 540. He talked about NATO countries paying up, abiding the agreement to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. He talked about South Korea, Japan, Germany, and Saudi paying more, and us subsidizing them less. It covered a lot of turf. And part of that was the idea that the sequester, as part of the budget deal that congressional Republicans negotiated with President Obama, the sequester needs to go. Do you agree with the need to lift the sequester and at least some of the broad strokes that Trump outlined in terms of the military rebuild?
I agree with the broad strokes, Dan, in rebuilding the military. There's no reason why our military should be as small as it is because, weakness only invites aggression. The key to peace, the key to not having conflict is to be the strongest out there. Now, that said, what Donald Trump said is he would achieve this by cutting government waste elsewhere. Well, I'd like to see, this is just anodyne. Every politician says
right.
it.
That's
I'd like to see exactly how. God knows I live in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of government waste out there. When it comes to the sequestration, which, as you said, was that congressional agreement to reduce the Pentagon budget 10%. The problem with that is that not the reduction of the waste, and you've had a huge growth of the civilian bureaucracy in the Pentagon, it's that there's no flexibility, so you have to cut 10% from every budget instead of saying, this office is wasteful, we're going to cut 37% from this, but this other one is essential, so we're actually going to increase its budget by 2%. What you're doing is cutting with an axe instead of cutting with a scalpel, and that has really hamstrung the Pentagon.
I wanted to ask you about last night, back to the Commander-in-Chief Forum, when Matt Lauer asked Donald Trump about his intelligence briefings. And I know they couldn't talk about specifics, but how do you think he should have handled that question?
Well, when Trump, the whole issue of the intelligence briefings with both candidates is so deeply, deeply disturbing. On one hand, you have Trump, who has had this relationship, including with some of it, or let me put it this way, some of his top aides have had relationships with Russia, which are deeply disturbing. You also have Trump, who has a habit of shooting else at the mouth, for lack of a better phrase. On the other hand, Clinton and some of her top aides have shown that they can't handle this sort of issue. I think, actually, for me, what was the most interesting question out there, or the most interesting discussion, was Matt Lauer pressing Donald Trump on his comments with regard to some of the generals, with regard to the Islamic State, how he knew the Islamic State better than the generals. And there is a real issue out there, Amy, with regard to the generals who look at things through political filters, who want to look at the art of the possible, what the White House wants, what Congress thinks possible, rather than giving good, honest military advice and letting the chips fall where they may. That's a discussion we need to have, because under George W. Bush during Operation Iraqi Freedom, and especially under Barack Obama, the key to promotion was telling the White House what they wanted to hear.
All right. He is Michael Rubin, former Pentagon official and resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Michael, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the